Every day is filled with choices. You're here because you're choosing to start with a win. Get ready to be inspired, learn something new, and connect with the Win Nation.
And coming to you from Denver, Colorado via the virtual studio, Adam Contos, CEO of Remax, here with Start With Win. And hey, well, let's just jump right into today's show. What do you think about that?
I'm excited about today's conversation. I actually have done some podcasting in the medical space with Tasha earlier this year with a company that we work with. And so when I heard her and her talk, I was like, oh, she would be great for Start With a Win. And this month, we are highlighting successful business women. And so I'm glad that she gets to be a part of this month of recording. So
I love that. So our guest today is Dr. Tasha Eurich. Dr. Eurich. Tasha is an organizational psychologist. This is like one of my favorite spaces, by the way, if you haven't been listening to me for the past couple of years. So she's an organizational psychologist, executive coach, another one of my favorite spaces, researcher, and New York Times best-selling author. Her primary areas of expertise are executive coaching, executive team development, and leadership, and high potential development programs. Let's welcome Tasha to the show. Tasha, welcome to Start With a Win.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, thank you. I mean, this is exciting because this is like one of my favorite things to talk about. You specialize in helping people and individuals, organizations, whatever, understand the importance of this thing that we're kind of all afraid of called self-awareness. So
we shouldn't be afraid, but yes, it is a big, meaty topic. And as we'll see, a lot of people have more work to do than they think.
Let's go down to the foundation of this. How do you define self-awareness, and why are most of us less self-aware than we think?
So you're exactly right. I had heard, this was maybe about 7 or 8 years ago now, and I kept hearing this term self-awareness. And it really had become a management buzzword. And, at the time, I had been coaching senior executive CEOs, C-suite teams for, 10 plus years. And I really wanted to know if my anecdotal evidence was actually scientifically true. And what I mean by that was the leaders who were willing to look at themselves in the mirror, to question the assumptions they were making about themselves, to get, sometimes very humbling feedback from the people they live and work with. They were always more successful than the people who, if I say this somewhat, jokingly, but also true, lived a life of blissful ignorance. So I assembled a research team from all over the country, and we basically wanted to determine, we wanted to answer 4 questions. The first was, what is self-awareness really? Number 2, where does it come from? 3, why do we need it? And 4, which was the most important for us, was to, how do we get more of it? And we spent years on this program. We're actually still working on it. It took us almost a year to just empirically define what is this term that we're all throwing around called self-awareness. So that was actually, it was sort of naive that I thought, well, we'll read 1,000 journal articles and we'll figure out what this is. But the good news was we were able to arrive, I call it simplicity on the other side of complexity. So self-awareness is the will and skill to see ourselves clearly. And it's made up of 2 different types of self-knowledge that are independent, but also both very important. So the first is something we named internal self-awareness. And essentially what that is it's kind of what we all think about when we hear that term, right? It's knowing who we are, what we stand for, what we want to achieve and experience in life. But at the same time, there's this pesky thing called external self-awareness. And what that really means is understanding how other people see us. And in our research, what we discovered, and again, this is, thousands of people all around the world that we got to study and learn from, is that it's not enough to just have one of those things. It's not enough to know what we stand for. If, for example, we don't know how we're coming across. And all of our employees or families or friends think that we're a jerk, and vice versa. It's also not enough to know kind of how we're coming across if we don't understand and appreciate how we can live a life of meaning and purpose and enjoyment. So it's a lot in there, but I think if you really boil it down, that's what self-awareness is really about and what the journey is about.
That's powerful. And you talk in a lot of your speeches, your book, everything like that, about this like 85 to 90% versus like 10 to 15%. Can you unpack those numbers for us? Because I think people will be surprised how actually self-unaware most of society is.
Right. But here's the bottom line. In our research, we have discovered that about 95% of people all around the world, all different age groups, demographics, industries, believe that they are self-aware. And only about 10 to 15% of us actually meet those criteria of being self-aware. So the joke I always make about this is, if 95% of us think we're self-aware, only 10 to 15% of us are, that means that on a good day, 80% of us are lying to ourselves about whether we're lying to ourselves.
Do you think that's a conscious effort to break out of that 80% for I mean, even for those that fall into that, you know, the self-aware group, don't they have to put forth a conscious effort to stay self-aware? Otherwise we kind of fade into society with all the distractions going on.
That's right. So there are lots of, probably more than we can cover today, but there are a lot of internal hardwired barriers to seeing ourselves clearly. And we live in a society that's almost tempting us to become more self-absorbed and less self-aware. And what we discovered, one thing we did in our research program is we studied people who didn't start off as self-aware, right? So think of the least self-aware person you've ever met. Imagine that person really understood all of a sudden who they were, how they came across. And what we discovered was every single one of them at some point, whether it was through a shattering or surprising experience, whether it was because they set a goal for themselves, they decided that it was better to be braver but wiser. And what that meant is essentially to say, no matter how self-aware I think I am, there's always going to be more that I can and should discover. And so it's not a self-loathing. I think sometimes people misunderstand that and they think, well, that Tasha is telling me that I should just, tell myself that I'm terrible and I'll never get self-aware. And it's actually very much the opposite. When we make that commitment to see ourselves clearly, number one, there's a lot of positive surprises that I think, are very gratifying. But number two, I believe that knowing is always better than not knowing. Because when we know, we have a choice and we're empowered to make it versus, just sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop, so to speak.
Can you talk about how this affects our influence and relationships and how that leads to our sales outcomes, things like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think all those questions are really important. So at this point in our process, again, 7+ years later, I'm even more confident that self-awareness is something I call the meta skill of the 21st century. So I'm just going to give you a couple of outcomes. I'm going to rattle them off, but know that there are literally 10 times more. But for the purposes of this audience, here's a couple that might be relevant. So people who are self-aware, who grow and develop and sustain their self-awareness, are better performers at work. They're more promotable. They're better communicators. They're more influential. They are less likely to lie, cheat, steal, behave unethically. They are more effective and respected leaders. They're better salespeople. There's even evidence, and I think it's pretty compelling, kind of starting to emerge across multiple studies, that companies who are not just led by self-aware, C-suite teams, but who have large numbers of self-aware employees are more profitable. So when people tell me, oh, this self-awareness stuff that you study, I've been meaning to get around to developing my self-awareness. It is truly a business imperative. And it's not just the work-related outcomes that we will see. If anybody has been, for example, trapped in the house with your family or, a spouse or children, maybe teenage children in particular, there's a lot there too. So people who are self-aware tend to have more rewarding and sustainable romantic relationships. They have deeper and more meaningful friendships. And I saved the best for last. Ready? People who are self-aware, who are parents, tend to raise more mature, less narcissistic children.
So is there a process our listeners can leverage to gather kind of enlightening, actionable feedback that improves their interactions with, relationships, customers, things like that?
So let me just give you two. One is an internally focused tool, and then the other is a very sort of quick and easy way to get some good feedback from someone else. So the first tool is called the daily check-in. And when we studied these, we called them self-awareness unicorns who didn't start out self-aware, but who really were able to dramatically improve that clarity that they saw themselves with. They basically asked themselves three essential questions. So the first question is, what went well today? The second question is, what didn't go so well today? And the third question is, what can I do to be smarter tomorrow?
Fantastic. I mean, just some great tools for developing ourselves, our leadership, just taking a step into this. But ultimately, I'd love for people to go out and check out your book, Insight. Can you tell us where to find your book and where can we find you on social media to learn more about your research and findings?
Sure. So Penguin Random House would want me to tell you that my book, Insight, is available wherever books are sold. It's pretty easy to find. There's a paperback and a hardcover. I'm everywhere on social media, Tasha Eurich. But the one thing I would want to offer your listeners and the folks watching this is a free tool that we put together in a sort of bold move to make the world more self-aware. And it is a 5-minute free self-awareness assessment. So if anybody wants to take that, it's totally free, no strings attached. You can find it at insight-quiz.com.
Tasha, I have one final question that I ask our speakers on our show, our guests, and I'm sure you've got some great insight into this. How do you start your day with a win?
This is going to sound, maybe too trivial to mention, but it actually makes a big difference for me, especially in quarantine COVID world. So when I wake up, I try to find one thing around the house that I can do to, whether it's laundry, whether it's picking up a room, just for 5 or 10 minutes so that I can start my day off with something that I've accomplished. And what I found is, there's positive momentum in getting things done. So then when I sit down to answer the, however many emails have come to me that evening, I feel ready and able to get a second win.
Awesome. Thank you for being on Start With a Win. We appreciate all that you do. And thanks for that insight, to quote the book there. Everybody be sure and check that out. And don't forget, start with a win.
That's right. And hey, thank you for listening to Start With a Win. If you'd like to ask Adam a question or tell us your Start With a Win story, give us a call and leave us a message at 888-581-4430. Don't forget to go on to iTunes and subscribe, write a review, and rate the show. And for more great content, head over to startwithawin.com. You can also follow Adam on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And remember, start with a win.
Hello, YouTube audience.
Hey, there they are. Tasha, thank you so much. Self-awareness is one of those things that, like you were saying earlier, that a lot of us think we have, but we lack. So, it's one of those things. I think when you're young and you work for a company, you have a boss, and you always are thinking like, man, why do they do this? Why do they do that? And then we grow up, and then we become the boss, and then we do all those same things. And so, I'm always interested in growing and learning and educating myself. But I got a question for you. For obviously those of you who are watching. Your background is a set of books that are like ombre, like perfectly like color, like from purple to turquoise to it's amazing. How did you do that?
There's a very long story behind this for some reason. So before COVID, I traveled about 250,000 miles a year, speaking, coaching, working all around the world. It was my favorite thing in the whole world. And I can't wait to get back to that soon, hopefully. But when lockdowns happened, I realized, pretty much overnight that this was the way the world was going to be seeing me. And as a fairly type A, overachieving person. I wanted it to look fabulous. So there's actually been lots of different iterations of this. This that you see here now, when I do TV shots, I actually have even more of the books.
Okay.
But for, things like this, I have the tight shot. But I just recently kind of did a wall renovation or a bookshelf renovation. So this is the 2.0 COVID version of my backdrop. It's just been fun. I don't know. There's something about it where in a world where we can't control a lot, I can at least buy like these beautiful doves up here.
Yeah. Are you Googling like purple book covers or red book covers?
Oh, yes. I'm not proud of this, but I'm going to round down and say 5 hours on Amazon and other, design sites a couple weeks ago.
Looking for sizes and colors and all that.
I was like, red dog. Because I knew
needed a book.
My studio OCD really kicked in when you opened up your Zoom window. So thank you. I appreciate that. You made my day.
It's a good way for us to connect, isn't it?
Totally.
OCD people. Yes.
Well, and it's funny because it's like you don't even notice it at first, but then as I'm like listening to you and watching you, I'm like, my eyes like, hey, wait a second. Look at all those beautiful colors and how they go together. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, hey, guys, thanks for tuning in. Remember to hit that thumbs up if this content was valuable to you and you enjoyed it. And make sure to hit that subscribe button so you get notified every time, as well as that little bell icon. You get notified every time we release a new episode. And thanks for being part of the community. If you have any comments or thoughts about self-awareness, leave those down in the comment field. And we'd love to interact with you. So until next time, we'll see you later.